I'm bringing Brooklyn in the house. Come on in.
Okay, cameras are speeding.
I started this show in 2009 with Brooklyn Savvy set in different living rooms. So the best way to celebrate 20 seasons is to bring it home, literally. I wanted to create a safe space to have uncomfortable yet transformative conversations that move people, amplifying the voices of those who are underrepresented and who inspire positive change. I'm Tony Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Race is a social construct, and we've made the case many times over the past 20 seasons. My goal has been to build bridges, but there are times when the conversations are downright uncomfortable as we reveal ourselves in full transparency. One of the most impactful bridge building dialogues I've had was with the women from the Uncomfortable Book Club. Let's take a look.
We're going to be talking about white fragility. And I think that if someone really wants to understand and tackle issues around systemic racism and around white privilege, it's very important to understand what white fragility means and what we can do, Black people, people of color, and white people, to work together to advance conversations around race. So before I get started, I want to introduce those who are with us. We have Ellen Gottlieb. She's a guest. She's the founder of the Uncomfortable Book Club. We have Carol Sandonik, and she is also a member of the Uncomfortable Book Club. We have Mary Ellen Kramer of the Uncomfortable Book Club. And then we have my Brooklyn Savvy panelistas, Lisa Bing, Jennifer Jones Austin, Dr. Maria De Longoria, and Dr. Toby Stein. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to ask the first question to Ellen Gottlieb. Now, Ellen, you were the creator of the Uncomfortable Book Club. Talk to us about what it is and why you decided to do this.
Okay. Thank you. The Getting Uncomfortable Book Club.
I got to put the getting in there. Right.
It's getting because you have to get uncomfortable. It's addressing uncomfortable conversations about race. Unfortunately, it was the murder of George Floyd, and his little daughter said that, my daddy changed the world. Well, her daddy really changed my world. My life changed that day. And it set off a series of events that changed my life. Watching that on TV, being a part of it, and then being part of the communities that I'm in every day. I went to my chorus and we had a town hall on what happened with George Floyd. And what moved me in that chorus was a video by Peggy McIntosh. I believe her name is McIntosh.
Yes,
and she wrote about white privilege, how it was unearned. And I got it immediately. And she talked about there's a line, and people above the line have white privilege, people below the line don't have it. And it just all made sense when she explained everything to me through this TED Talk. And she also said how rich her life became when she hired people below the white privilege line and she worked with them. And she said how rich her life became. And that made sense to me too. And I said, this is the way it should be. And again, I work at a real estate company, and we had a town hall of 15 people that work at the company. And they talked about how their life was exhausting trying to defend themselves the way they had to do being Black, and also being Black and being a realtor. Mm-hmm. One person said she walked out of a house and the cops were waiting for her.
Wow.
And one more thing, and then I'm in a leadership class with Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen was leading the leadership class, and we had a town hall, and I just started crying. I just couldn't fathom it. I couldn't hold it anymore. And I was like, there's got to be something that I can do. And, it was a leadership class, and it was to create a project. And my project was the Getting Uncomfortable Book Club. And I'm in.
Now, you reached out to me and you said, Tony,
Yeah.
would you like to join this? And I thought, gee whiz, this sounds like an incredible opportunity to make a difference. So I said, perhaps my savvy panelistas would be a really good group of women to help have this conversation. And the reason I thought that is because I have two subject matter experts. I have Dr. Maria De Longoria, who is a history professor at Med Rivers College, and I have Dr. Tony Stein. So I figured we'd be able to have a really intentional, robust discussion around this. And if I may, I'd like for our audience to understand what white privilege is. Toby, can you talk to us about what white privilege is?
So picking up on what Ellen said about Peggy McIntosh, she is a white scholar, and what she says is white privilege is predicated on the fact that white people have unearned privileges based just on being white. And we fail as white people to acknowledge the impact of the majority of these privileges and the harm that we cause Black and brown people based on these unearned assets based on white privilege. It's more comfortable for us as white people to remain oblivious, to remain unaware, unresponsive, because to be conscious of the facts that our neighborhoods are segregated through historical redlining and inequitable access to mortgages based on race. Our education, our access to education and healthcare are based on race, and that George Floyd was killed, as so many Black men are, because he was Black and because our criminal justice system is grounded in a slave patrol mentality. This acknowledgement is really stressful for white people to bear, to hear. And so we choose not to think about it. We choose not to do anything about it, to remain oblivious.
So let's talk about that too. But before we do that, Maria, is there anything you want to add to Toby's definition around white privilege?
Yeah, I found something this week that I found quite interesting. There is a professor from Northwestern University. His name is Banner Hess, and he has what he calls the 8 white identities. And white privilege is one of those identities. I don't know, maybe some of you saw this floating around social media. But the 8 identities range from white supremacist being one, and I don't know if that's 1 or 8, but white supremacist is at one end of the spectrum, and white abolitionist is at the other end of the spectrum. And in between, there's white traitor, white critical, white confessional, white benefit, white privilege, white voyeurism. And it kind of breaks down where white folks would fall anywhere on that spectrum. So it might not be white privilege, it might be white voyeurs, and he defines them all. And I found that really interesting, and I think it goes nicely with what Toby was just talking about.
So I guess this gets into why the conversations are uncomfortable. So Mary,
I'm still in the place of trying to figure out whether or not we really it's kind of 6 degrees of separation. Is it 8 degrees of white, like privilege? Because it's privilege at every level for me. So I feel like I need to unpack that. I benefited from the book club discussion. I learned a lot. I met some interesting women who I believe are earnestly trying to unpack white privilege and what that means for them. I do find myself, I guess we're now 6 months in or so, wondering, what does it mean? Like, how many books do you have to read to say, okay, what does this mean for my life? And what changes am I making?
That honest, authentic dialogue is a way to where we want to go. Greater understanding.
What made you uncomfortable? Meaning, what was it that was uneasy for you?
The push pull, that there were a lot of there was a lot of there were a lot of feelings, a lot of different ideas. Some of them I didn't understand. Some of them I probably was at odds with myself. I wasn't sure what my feelings were. As I said, I'd not been in this kind of a conversation before. And there was a lot of truth on both sides, but I don't think we were ready to hear each other's truths. It was a push pull and a tug of war. And I said, if we're not going to listen to each other, being who I am, I'm always thinking about what can I get? What can I hear from you? I'm one of those people that sit in the room and soak everything up. And what I heard was, well, if everybody's going to stick to their guns, where are we going from here? That was the initial meeting. And
that I've been lied to throughout my life about all of the systems of society and how racist they are. And I have to spend the rest of my life working on how I've internalized that racism and how I have absolutely no question, harmed people of color along the way through my being oblivious. I think that's a real. I think that's absolutely been internalized, and it's harmful even as I speak now. I think what Jennifer's saying, like Toby, how can you be so oblivious? Because by being oblivious, white people don't have to unpack anything. We don't have to take responsibility. We don't have to do anything about it. We can lean on the fact that we're going to a book club, for example. We're talking about race. And then beyond that, not do anything in terms of anti-racist action. And so I've come to learn that for me to have morality and integrity, that I have to absolutely spend every day working on undoing the racism in my life and working on racial justice in this country.
Typically, when you talk about white supremacy, people think about those folks that were in the Capitol, burning the place down, So what is it, Maria?
Well, it goes much deeper than that. And it's, I think we kind of talked about it in some of our previous conversations when we were talking about the structure and the nature of the society, right? Because we say it's built on white supremacy. So what exactly does that mean? That means that its society is created for white folks. It is created for the benefit of white folks. And it applies to all white folks, even though it didn't necessarily intend to apply to all white folks in the very beginning. It kind of evolves out of this concept of race, and we kind of talked about that on other shows also, about this concept of race. And so the idea of what we call racial categories and this whole idea of racial differences and things like that race is socially constructed, right? And when I say that, we're talking about this idea that there was no, if you go back in history, there was no real concept of these are black people and these are white people and these are brown people and these are blue people and these are yellow people, right? There were people, and there were people who had different ethnicities and different religions and different cultures, and I'll use in different nations, right? And I'm using nations versus the word tribes. And so you had people who were clustered that way. And it was only this whole concept of race was developed as a way to control and empower and enslave and marginalize and colonize other people, right? And a lot of it was economic in motivation. And that's what we see play out now. And so if you think back, you know, you often hear people say, you know, that Black people enslaved Black people. But what really the concept is more as you had different ethnicities, right, participating for different reasons and different levels in the enslavement of people. It was not that I'm capturing my Black brothers and sisters. When you look at the Sunni and the Shiites, right, they don't look like they're fighting their brothers or their sisters. They identify as two culturally religious different groups, and that's how societies used to be. And it was with this colonization, right, with the establishment of the slave trade, that you really saw this concept of Black and white kind of play out, particularly in American society, and the rest of the world follows.
You know, I will say I'm like you, the word they use, you know, the panelistas here use is the word oblivious. I live in my little bubble. And my bubble just got bursted over the summer with the killing of George Floyd. But so I may not.
Hey, Ellen, can I just jump in for a second and suggest that you talk about, so the question came up also about reading. And I think that, you know, and it's a fair question, right? So, you know, it's a good thing to start a book club and it's a good thing to read. But the question that Jennifer poses is an important one. At what point do you start acting? And, and
That's what you want to get to.
Ellen, I'd like you to talk about the actions, the concrete actions that you're taking in your business as a result of your new awareness.
Okay. Immediately, I joined the Diversity and Inclusion Council, right? And the problem we have there is, what are the actions? And the actions we can take as realtors is we can mentor. So there's mentoring and there's education. So it's mentoring younger up and coming realtors to be successful, because a lot of the complaints are, you know, you're financially capped, right? So if we could train and teach younger brokers, brokers of color, then it would give a leg up, is one. And the other is education, teaching people how to know their avenues of purchasing real estate, which allows them to build equity and invest themselves, but do it in the correct way, right? Because there have been people that have taken advantage of people that didn't know how to invest in real estate. But so those two avenues, and the Diversity and Inclusion Council, they are mad because they just want to do actions. They don't want to talk. And I had that conversation with you, Lisa. They want to act. And so that's where we are. We're acting. And I actually have taken on someone that I'm mentoring. And he came to me. I didn't actually go to him. He came to me, and he's a Black man, and I'm so happy that I get to mentor him. So I don't know.
Kara, you were going to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the Diversity Council that I know that Ellen's on, and I wanted to be on, but that's a different conversation. It was full, which is a really good thing, I have to say. I was impressed with how many people stepped up for it. Yeah, I mean, I think mentoring definitely is part of it. I mean, I think also one of the things I've been doing, which is a small action, but I think, greater things are made up of lots and lots of small actions. So I've been reaching out to other brokers of color that I work with, that I get along with, that, we communicate and we can co-broke together, which means we work on deals together and we share information together. There's this idea of social capital, right? It's like you've got information, and how do you get to it if you're like cut out of the groups, right? And so people need to bring you in and say, did you know about this? Do you know about that? What about this? What have you got? Here's what I've got. And how can we help each other, and how can we support each other? I mean, even very small actions like on social media, when somebody's there's so many Black women on my social media feed, and when they've posted that they've put something into contract or they've sold something, to applaud them and to support them instead of tearing them down, and to let them know, I'm here for you. If you have any questions, if I can be supportive, and they can support me too. I mean, I have so much to learn from other people. Absolutely. That's why I'm here. So that's some more of it.
So Tony, can I speak to the whole diversity council piece? Because you raised this issue in one of the conversations about what companies are doing. And it's great that individuals are taking actions, but let's talk also about the systemic and the organizational, because I'm working with organizations. I've been working with one now and creating an action plan towards this in this regard. And one of the things that I would caution against around diversity councils, it's a good start, but to make sure that number one, you have the support of the C-suite, that there are actual resources, monetary resources behind these actions, and that the councils are not used as another way of checking boxes. So that's a caution that I need to put out to councils, because many of them are not savvy enough, and it's not a criticism, to recognize the power structures and what's really needed to make these changes.
Yeah, I'm trying to
Mary Ellen.
Tony's so right on that. I mean, not Tony, I'm sorry. Lisa is so right on that point.
Right.
We've had more diversity and equity and inclusion conversations and councils and organizations over the course of the last 20 to 25 years. You know, every other, I'm an attorney. And so many of my Black sisters who are attorneys are now diversity, equity, and inclusion officers for corporations, Fortune 500 companies. And then why, with all of this DEI work that we're doing, are Black women represented just 8% of corporate jobs and less than 4% of C-suite jobs? Why do we have fewer Black corporate execs, male and female, today than we did 20 years ago? And so I appreciate the DEI work, but I think we need to look at whether or not it comes into
the right work. Yeah.
Conversations and let's hire some more people at the lower level, but not where change is really made.
And where the real money is. Mary Ellen, what is your company doing in terms of this, or what have you done?
Well, I'd like to speak to the nonprofit world.
Okay.
So I'm actually board chair of an organization that serves people in New York State prisons with therapeutic community services and also upon reentry. And if you look at this sector, this nonprofit sector, what you see is a lot of white women my age running organizations that are serving communities of color. So we just, since we started this conversation, we said, this is it. And our executive director is now a gentleman who used to be a corrections officer in a New York State prison. He's African American. And we are now filling our board with people who are representative and people who are interested in the communities that these people are coming back to, namely that they are people of color themselves. And, what I'm on a coalition right now, which we've all formed, and this is our mission, that we are now going to have people in positions of power in nonprofit who are people of color.
I read in the New York Times that 75% of white folks have no Black friends. And you don't know what you're missing, people. But for people of color, it's 1 out of every 8 of our friends is white. My friend group has always been really, really diverse, and I've never been color struck. My relatives on my mother's side, my maternal line, many of them looked white. And, and I was accustomed to light-skinned people loving dark-skinned people and vice versa. It's the political structure that we're in that makes all of this upside down and convoluted. And it especially shows up when we're in competitive spaces like work and school. And that's when it starts to show up in ways that are oppressive. Sometimes you have to really bulk up to hear the truth. And when it triggers you, that's a signal that you've got some work to do. I'm just saying. Now, coming to the table is another intervention group that aims to build bridges.
So why don't we talk about why we decided to do this show on race relations in this way, Sylvia?
Well, I was telling you about a group that I had joined. It's called Coming to the Table. And I became involved with them once I learned about lynching that took place in my family. I had been doing some genealogy background search, and I found an uncle had been lynched. And when I started learning more about it, I became very traumatized. So a cousin of mine actually said, you know, you really should go to talk to this group called Coming to the Table. They really are all organized around slavery.
In what way, though, do they organize around
Everyone
slavery?
that's involved with this group, white and black.
So it's a diverse group.
It's a very diverse group. So it's about white people who have discovered their family's involvement in slavery, and it's about black people who have found out about slavery in their family and have researched their family. So what happened was that once I found out that my uncle, my great-grandfather's brother was lynched, I went to Coming to the Table and I told him, I said, I'm really traumatized. I don't know why I'm so traumatized because I did not know this uncle, but I just was so traumatized hearing about what happened to him. And so I said, I don't know what to do. And so they said, okay, we want you to be paired with another person. She's a white person whose family had been lynchers.
Now you see, I've never heard of anything like this. This is real interesting.
This is amazing. Yes, and this lady said that, and I became very good friends with her. And she said she had found out that an ancestor of hers was very involved in the slave trade, and not only that, he was the town minister and a judge and the head of the government in the town. And he also was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and also she believes had participated in a number of lynchings of black people in this town.
So that's pretty much what Coming to the Table is, pairing people together. So you're a member of Coming to the Table.
I just started with them.
Right. So why don't you share with us a little bit about your story?
So my history is that in about 1998, my cousin Katrina, my first cousin, she approached me and said that she had found out that our grandmother was descended from the largest slave trading family in the history of the country.
Now, how did that make you feel? Because some people could care less about that, right?
Yeah.
Hey, just sweep it under the rug, no big deal.
Yeah, I was shocked. You know, I was shocked, and so she asked me if I wanted to participate in this project, and she went on to make a film called Traces of the Trade, and I did participate in it. But at the time, you know, it was two things. I said yes, but it took me a very long time to really, it took me a very long time to use the word we. I always talked about them for many years.
So you didn't claim it, so to speak.
No.
That was what they did.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So it took me a very long time to get to that point. So like shock, and it just kind of sent me into a tailspin for a while, but I knew I had to deal with it, you know, and I did, and it was a long process. It was a very long process.
Well, we're going to talk more about that, but I'm going to move on over to Julie. Now, you're in Coming to the Table as well, and what is your connection?
Right. Well, my mother and one of the older sisters in my family do a lot of genealogy. So I've been brought up with genealogy, and I was researching the South because of a play that I was working on for a class, and I asked my mother, well, we had relatives in the South, but did they ever own slaves? She said, yes, they did. And I said, I got kind of hyper, and I said, oh, but they were Quakers and they set them free, right? She said, no, they were not Quakers, and they did not set them free. She said, well, I have a manuscript up here, you can come up and look at it. And I found names of slaves in this genealogy manuscript of my grandmother.
And she had never shared this with you before?
Are there any relationships? Meaning, do you share any family members? Because oftentimes when people own slaves,
this was 14 years ago, and I felt I had an obligation to let the names of the slaves be accessible to other genealogists who are looking for their roots in African American genealogy. Anyway, so I kept digging and digging, and I was working on the genealogy, and a few years ago I woke up at 6 a.m. and I went, some of these slaves are listed as very light. And I realized at 6 in the morning, my fourth great-grandfather, John Henderson, is probably the reason they're light. And I erased the genealogy where it said second wife, and then I added third wife, common law wife, probably slave.
Brooklyn, when you watch Brooklyn Savvy, you just gotta be ready. You gotta be ready to go deep. You gotta be ready to hear authentic conversations. We'll see you next time on Brooklyn Savvy.